The late morning sunlight streamed through the tall courtroom windows, falling in sharp rectangles across the polished wooden benches and marble floor. Every beam highlighted the tension in the air, thick and suffocating like heat on a summer day. Judge Caprio sat at the bench, robes crisp, expression sharp, his eyes scanning the courtroom with an almost predatory patience. The room was packed, families, lawyers, reporters, and perched in the front row was a little girl no older than 10, her arms crossed, legs swinging impatiently, eyes fixed on the judge with a mix of defiance and boredom. At that exact moment, an Arab billionaire CEO, Amir Al-Nasir, sat quietly in a corner box, the sunlight catching the subtle glint of his expensive watch. He had come not for personal reasons but because today's case had unexpectedly drawn him in, a high-profile dispute that had reached the very top of his business interests, and now he was witnessing something utterly unexpected. The little girl, sensing the weight of the room yet unmoved by it, snapped at the judge, "You're so slow. Why do you even sit there if you can't do anything right?" The words echoed sharply in the sunlit courtroom. Gasps rippled across the audience. Some leaned forward, shocked, others tried not to laugh. Judge Caprio's brow furrowed, lips pressing into a tight line, but he did not speak immediately. Silence stretched for what felt like a heartbeat, the sunlight amplifying the stillness, highlighting the gravity of the moment. Amir's dark eyes narrowed, observing carefully, recognizing not just impudence but a test of authority. A small human challenging a symbol of power. Then, in a calm yet thunderous voice that made the girl flinch, Judge Caprio finally spoke, "Young lady, do you understand the gravity of speaking to me that way in my courtroom?" The little girl rolled her eyes, shrugging, her defiance unshaken by the sun glinting off the polished wood, unaware of the storm she had just provoked. Amir leaned slightly forward, fingers steepled, watching carefully. Something told him this wasn't going to end with a simple reprimand, and in daylight, there would be no shadows to hide the consequences. The sunlight poured relentlessly through the towering windows, illuminating every polished surface of the courtroom with sharp clarity. The little girl, Lila, barely 10 but already with a streak of arrogance that made adults uneasy, sat slumped in her chair, arms crossed defiantly. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed, his normally composed face tightening as he stared at her, the midday sun catching the edges of his silver hair and highlighting the deep lines of authority carved into his expression. Every whisper from the gallery seemed amplified in the bright courtroom, the murmurs of shocked onlookers threading through the sunlit air like tensioned wires. Amir Al-Nasir, the Arab billionaire CEO, leaned slightly forward in his seat, hands clasped, observing with a calculating intensity. He wasn't here for justice, or at least not in the conventional sense, but he understood power when he saw it, and he sensed that the girl was testing a boundary that should never have been crossed. Lila, Judge Caprio's voice cut through the murmurs, steady but sharp. "Do you realize that disrespecting the court is not only rude, it's contempt?" Lila's lips curved into a smirk. "You just sit there all day. How can that be a crime?" Gasps filled the sunlit room, and even some of the lawyers froze, unsure how to respond to such raw, unfiltered impudence. Amir's dark eyes flashed, not with anger but with a quiet, lethal intrigue. He recognized the type, someone unaware that consequences exist, someone about to be schooled in the harsh reality of authority. Judge Caprio leaned forward, hands gripping the polished oak bench, voice dropping slightly, low but carrying weight that made the air feel heavier in the sun's glow. "Young lady, you may think this is a game, but every action has consequences. Perhaps you need a lesson in respect, right here, right now, in the daylight where everyone can see." Lila blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her otherwise confident face. But before she could react further, Amir rose slowly from his seat, the sun catching the edges of his tailored suit, his presence commanding without a word. The room seemed to shift around him, even Judge Caprio's gaze flicked momentarily toward the billionaire. Amir's voice, calm but edged with authority, filled the sunlit courtroom. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, I think this young lady could benefit from understanding that words have weight, especially when spoken in front of everyone watching. Some lessons are best remembered." The gallery fell silent again. The little girl's eyes widened as the quiet, powerful figure of Amir Al-Nasir subtly but unmistakably shifted the room's energy. Lila had just realized that her defiance was no longer just against a judge, someone far more powerful than her was watching, and in broad daylight, there would be no hiding from what came next. The bright afternoon sunlight poured into the courtroom, casting stark, unwavering light across the polished floors and wooden benches, illuminating the tension that had taken over the space. Lila Maror, still perched defiantly in the front row, felt a prickle of unease creep up her spine as Amir Al-Nasir remained standing, his dark eyes locked on hers like a predator observing prey. The billionaire's presence was commanding, unspoken power radiating from him as if the sun itself had bent to emphasize his authority. Judge Caprio adjusted his robes, the lines of his face sharper in the light, and nodded toward Amir. "Mr. Al-Nasir, you may proceed," he said, voice steady but carrying weight. Amir's lips curved faintly into a controlled smile, the kind that promised precision and consequences. "Lila," he began, voice calm but cutting, "you may not know me, but I see everything here. Your disrespect was heard by every adult, every peer, and even me. In daylight, actions are visible, and words, especially reckless ones, are remembered forever." Lila crossed her arms stubbornly, trying to meet his gaze, but the force of his presence made her blink involuntarily. The room was silent except for the creak of the wooden floor beneath Amir's polished shoes as he took a slow step closer. "Disrespect isn't about anger," he continued. "It's about responsibility. And responsibility is something you'll need to learn if you wish to command even a fraction of respect from those around you." The little girl's smirk faltered. Something in Amir's voice, the clarity in the sunlight, the way his eyes never wavered, began to unnerve her. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward. "Lila, you may speak if you wish to apologize. Or you may learn in a manner that cannot be ignored." The girl opened her mouth, then shut it again, uncertainty creeping into her confident posture. Amir's voice lowered just slightly, so that only she could hear, but the weight behind the words made the entire room lean in unconsciously. Sometimes, a lesson is most remembered when it stings in a way words cannot convey. And that is what will happen here. He paused, letting the sunlight glint off the edges of the courtroom fixtures, casting a subtle halo over him, highlighting the contrast between his calm control and the girl's growing unease. The gallery held its breath. Even the lawyers, reporters, and onlookers seemed frozen, waiting for the moment when authority would finally meet audacity, and daylight would illuminate the consequences of arrogance. Lila's small hands gripped the edge of the bench as she realized she had underestimated the power of someone who understood not just law, but human psychology, and how to teach lessons that would echo far beyond the sunlit walls of a courtroom. Amir stepped even closer, voice softening just slightly, yet every word carried gravity. "Remember, young lady, respect is not demanded by fear. It is commanded by integrity. And those who fail to learn it, even in daylight, will always face the consequences." The little girl's shoulders slumped slightly as the weight of the moment settled, and for the first time, the courtroom, the sunlit, golden room that had witnessed so much spectacle and arrogance, felt like a place where actions truly mattered, and where even the smallest defiance could not escape the scrutiny of power. The courtroom remained flooded with bright afternoon light, each beam catching the polished surfaces and casting a crisp clarity across every witness, lawyer, and onlooker. Lila Maror shifted uneasily in her seat, the defiance she had worn like armor now cracking under the weight of Amir Al-Nasir's unyielding presence. Every subtle movement the billionaire made seemed amplified by the sunlight, from the faint tap of his polished shoes on the marble floor to the slow, deliberate tilt of his head. Judge Caprio observed quietly, the calm authority of the bench complementing Amir's commanding daytime energy, as though two forces of power had converged, one of law, the other of unspoken influence. Amir stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, voice cutting through the room with precision. "Lila, the lesson here is simple. Words carry weight, and disrespect is never without consequence. Daylight reveals everything: truth, intent, and character. There is no hiding from it." Lila's small hands gripped the edge of the bench, the wood biting into her fingers, yet her eyes flickered with hesitation. She had believed this was a game, a stage where she could perform and provoke without repercussion. Now, under the unforgiving light, she realized the stakes were far higher. The gallery leaned in, captivated by the spectacle unfolding in broad, unforgiving sunlight. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, lawyers exchanged glances, and even the courthouse staff paused, aware that the dynamics of authority and power were being demonstrated with breathtaking clarity. Judge Caprio's gavel rose slightly, the midday sun catching its polished surface, and then fell with measured authority. "Young lady," he said firmly, "the court will not tolerate insolence. You may apologize, or you will learn in a manner that leaves no room for doubt." Amir's gaze didn't waver. "And understand this," he continued, the sunlight glinting off his watch as he gestured subtly toward her. "Every action has visibility. Every word has power. The choices you make under the sun's witness determine how the world perceives you." Lila swallowed hard, the last traces of her bravado fading as the lesson sank in. She had been confronted not by mere reprimand, but by someone who wielded presence and authority with surgical precision. The room seemed to hum with anticipation, the bright daylight illuminating the moment where recklessness met accountability. Slowly, she straightened, her voice tentative yet genuine. I apologize, Your Honor. I didn't. I shouldn't have." Amir nodded ever so slightly, the faintest shadow of approval in his eyes, signaling that the lesson had landed. The sunlight reflected in the courtroom like a silent witness to justice, not punishment for its own sake, but correction, clarity, and respect under the unmistakable gaze of day. Every observer, from the gallery to the judge to the reporters, felt the gravity of the moment. And Lila, for the first time, understood that authority and consequence are not threats to fear, but truths to respect, even in the brilliant, exposing light of daytime. The courtroom sun continued to stream in relentlessly, lighting every polished surface, every polished shoe, and every anxious face with unflinching clarity. Lila Maror sat in the front row, her small hands folded in her lap, shoulders tense as the weight of her earlier defiance pressed down on her. The air felt thick, almost electric, as the courtroom waited for what came next. Amir Al-Nasir remained standing, a figure of calm authority in the bright daylight, his tailored suit reflecting the sun's rays just enough to subtly remind everyone present that power could take many forms. Judge Caprio's gaze shifted between the girl and the billionaire, his voice steady, cutting through the charged air. "Young lady, respect is not optional. You will learn that words have consequences, whether you like it or not." Lila's eyes widened, glancing briefly at Amir, whose presence alone seemed to magnify the seriousness of her situation. Amir's dark eyes softened slightly, just enough to convey that this was not about fear, it was about understanding. "In daylight," he said, voice measured, "there is no hiding from truth. What you say, what you do, will always be visible. Your actions ripple beyond this room, and those who wield power or influence are always watching." Lila swallowed hard. The defiance that had seemed so natural moments ago was now replaced by a creeping awareness of accountability. She realized that her disrespect was not just noticed by the court but by someone whose presence could shape the way the world viewed her future. Amir took a slow step closer, the sunlight illuminating the deliberate movements that carried weight far beyond his physical presence. "You will understand that lessons in life are earned," he said quietly, almost as if he were speaking directly to the part of her that had thought herself untouchable. Judge Caprio nodded in agreement, and the gallery remained silent, every observer fully aware of the unfolding lesson. Lila's lips trembled, and for the first time, she looked genuinely remorseful. I understand," she murmured, voice barely audible, but enough for everyone to hear. "I will respect the court. I will respect authority." Amir's gaze softened further, the sharp edges of his authority giving way to recognition that the lesson had been received. "Good," he said. "Remember that daylight shows everything. True strength is measured not by defiance, but by how we respond when the world watches us, and when the consequences are clear." The tension in the room began to dissipate slightly, the bright sun no longer feeling oppressive but illuminating understanding. Lila shifted in her seat, her small frame no longer a symbol of rebellion but of growth, her defiance tempered by the undeniable lesson delivered under the unforgiving clarity of daylight. The entire courtroom, from Judge Caprio to the gallery, seemed to exhale collectively, aware that authority had been reinforced, respect had been earned, and the sunlit room had witnessed a transformation as powerful as any ruling written in ink. The sun poured through the towering courtroom windows, illuminating every polished surface, every face in the gallery, and every detail of the marble floor, leaving nothing hidden. Lila Maror, once defiant and cocky, now sat upright, small hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes wide with realization. She had seen authority, presence, and consequence all at once, delivered not with anger but with precision. Amir Al-Nasir, the Arab billionaire CEO, remained standing near the corner of the courtroom, calm, imposing, and unflinchingly observant, the sunlight catching the subtle gleam of his watch and emphasizing the quiet power he carried. Judge Caprio's eyes softened slightly, though his presence remained firm, the embodiment of law tempered with measured wisdom. "Lila," he said, voice strong but not unkind, "today you have learned a lesson about respect, about consequence, and about responsibility. This courtroom is a place where words have power, and actions are never without effect." Lila nodded slowly, swallowing back tears she hadn't expected to shed. "I understand, Your Honor. I will never speak like that again." Amir's gaze softened, his voice calm but resonant enough for her to feel its weight. "Remember this, respect is not about fear or intimidation. It is earned through honesty, integrity, and understanding the impact of your actions. Daylight exposes truth, and courage is measured by how you face it. What you do under the sun, when everyone can see, defines who you are." The sunlight glinted off the polished wood and marble, a silent witness to the transformation. The gallery seemed to exhale collectively, aware that what they had witnessed was more than a lesson for a single girl. It was a demonstration of accountability, courage, and the balance between authority and wisdom. Lila's shoulders relaxed slightly, understanding for the first time that defiance has consequences, and respect is more than words. It is an action carried consistently, visible to all. Amir stepped back, nodding once toward Judge Caprio, and then toward Lila, a subtle acknowledgement of the lesson delivered. The courtroom seemed almost serene, the afternoon sun casting warm, golden light over everyone, illuminating not just the physical space but the truths now ingrained in the hearts of those present. True respect is earned, not demanded. Words carry weight, and actions leave a mark that sunlight cannot hide. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face consequences openly and honestly, in the light of day. Lessons learned under witness and accountability are remembered forever, shaping character, defining integrity, and teaching that authority is respected not through intimidation, but through understanding, honesty, and the humility to recognize one's own mistakes. In daylight, the truth always shines, and those who embrace it grow stronger than any power or status could ever make them.